Laura sat in her dark living room, staring at her phone. The message was short. "We need to talk." She read it again and again, trying to find something more in those words. Greg, her husband, father of their two children, the man she had spent 30 years with, had cheated on her, and now he had made his decision. Or had he? She didn't know. For 3 months, she had felt something was wrong. Cold looks, his phone always with him, strange late nights at work. Her friend Susan once said, "Laura, don't you think he's lying to you?" Laura had ignored it, but the thought stayed in her mind like a splinter. And now today he had texted her, "We need to talk." That meant he had decided everything. Laura took a deep breath and looked round. The house was silent, but suddenly she felt she wasn't alone. She stood up, walked to the kitchen, and poured herself some wine. In the mirror of the cabinet, she saw a shadow move. Her heart beat faster. She turned quickly. No one was there, but the feeling of unease didn't leave her. The house had been their home for 20 years, but tonight it felt unfamiliar. The old wooden floors creaked softly as if someone was walking just behind her. She shook her head. Maybe it was just her imagination, fueled by stress and anxiety. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, filling the silence. Laura sipped her wine, trying to calm her nerves, but the feeling of pain watched grew stronger. She turned to the kitchen light and walked back to the living room, her steps slow and cautious. Half an hour later, the door opened. Greg walked in, dropped his case on the table, and sighed heavily. "Laura, he started. "You cheat on me," she interrupted, looking straight into his eyes. Greg looked away. He was about to say something, but Laura suddenly released. She didn't want to hear excuse or explanation. Suddenly the ceiling light flickered and the room became cold. "Someone is here," she whispered, feeling a strange presence. Greg frowned. "What are you talking about?" At the moment, the hallway door slammed shut on its own. Greg flinched. Laura felt the air grow heavy and thick. A strange sound echoed through the house, like whispers in the walls. The air smelled of something old and forgotten, like dust and decay. "You betrayed us," a whisper came from above. Greg turned sharply, but no one was there. "Who's there?" he shouted, his voice choking. Laura watched him and suddenly understood. That voice, it was familiar. It sounded like her mother's voice in her last day. But her mother had died 20 years ago. The shadow from the ceiling suddenly rushed down. Greg screamed, but it was too late. Something invisible pushed him hard, and he fell to the floor. Laura stood still, watching as Greg struggled, as if something was holding him down. "You destroyed our family." The voice grew louder. "You betrayed her. Now you will pay." Greg's eyes widened in terror as he gasped. like a driven man. The shadow wrapped around him, and his body twitched in a final spasm. His fingers scratched at the wooden floor, leaving deep marks, but his movement slowed as the darkness swallowed him. "Laura, help me!" He choked out, but his voice was weak, fading. Laura took a step back. She felt no pity, no anger, only a strange calm. The air in the room thickened, heavy with an unseen voice. The temperature dropped, and her breath came out in mystery pulse. Greg's body contracted in unnatural ways, as if unseen hands twisted him. The shadow deepened around him, its shape growing larger, more defined. A dark, faceless entity looming over him. It was no longer just a whisper, but a princess, full of rage and sorrow. "This is justice," the voice echoed through the room. "For every lie, for every broken promise." Greg let out a final, strangled cry before his body fell limp. The darkness wheeled around him one last time before dissipating, heavy on the silence. Laura stood frozen, watching the lifeless body of the man she once loved. The clock had stopped. The whispers had died. The air was still, but the princess had not tried left. Laura stepped closer. Her husband lay motionless, his face frozen in fear, but there was no life in him anymore. She took a deep breath and suddenly felt peace. She looked around the dimly lit room, expecting to see something, anything, but the shadow was gone. The air was still except for the faint sound of the wind outside. For years, she had carried the weight of her mother's words. Never let a betrayal go unanswered, she had once told her. Laura had never truly understood what she meant until now. She walked over to the window and looked outside. The moon was full, casting long, eerie shadows on the ground. A part of her felt relief, but another part felt strangely empty. "Thank you, Mom," she whispered into the emptiness. Somewhere in the darkness, a whisper replied. It was too soft to understand, but Laura felt its meaning. She was not alone. The shadow vanished, leaving only a cold trace in the air. But Laura knew this wasn't the end.